Hello. It's so wonderful to be here speaking with all of you, and it feels symbolic that I'm talking to an empty auditorium. It's another reminder of the state of our world. We're all going through something historic and unprecedented in our time. And we've all had varied experiences during this crisis, but the umbrella theme is still the same. You and I are living through a pandemic. None of us have been taught how to deal with these kinds of circumstances. The months trickle by, but the thought that haunts us all stays the same. When is it going to end? When can I pick up where I left off? It's difficult to talk about COVID-19 and the impact it's had on every facet of life while remaining positive. How do we talk about something debilitating with a sense of hope? How do we remain engaged in living our lives and working towards our goals in the face of such an uncertain future? The last 6 months have been really tough for me. Being a college student has been a huge part of my identity. I started taking collegiate level courses in high school when I was 14 and began community college at 15 years old. I missed out on a lot of those classic adolescent experiences and forwent a lot of living in the now so that I could pursue my future. I had a lot of aspirations, goals, and plans I was striving toward, and had just taken my first steps towards a future I was excited about. I had decided to apply to my dream graduate program, so I was getting involved in student leadership opportunities, touring grad schools, going to conferences, and working hard to build up my academic portfolio. When quarantine started, lockdown seemed like a brief inconvenience to wait out. But as the weeks dragged on, I realized that my enthusiasm for my plans started floundering. All the events I had were canceled. I felt like I was having to drag myself through my classes. I wasn't researching or learning. I wasn't myself. I felt sad, and it took me a while to recognize and call that sadness what it was: grief. When I think about grief and how it's expressed, I think about Elisabeth Kubler-Ross's model of grief, commonly referred to as the 5 stages of grief. It's a framework philosophy that can help give people a better understanding of their emotions around loss. The 5 stages of grief are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And it was amazing to realize that because of this pandemic, I had been experiencing the stages for myself. First, there was my denial. When school first shut down, we all thought it would be temporary. The constant message was that this would be short-lived and that it wouldn't have a major impact on anything, right? See, that's a huge part of the denial. This isn't happening. And by this, I mean a major disruption to all plans for the foreseeable future. Keep hoping that your graduation will be in person, and that concert you bought tickets for in 2 months should still be performing. Besides, the virus will disappear when the weather warms up, won't it? It was a time of bated breath and buckling down, and this felt like most of spring term for me and a lot of my colleagues. The thought was, if we could push through this one virtual term, we could get back to a sense of normalcy. But we all know, being that spring term was several months ago, that hasn't been the case. Then came the anger. What? Hold on. Summer is going to be virtual too. We just got through the gut punch that was spring. Now summer. Now fall. This is no longer anything resembling brief. I was angry that I was supposed to live this way. Zoom calls were awkward and glitchy all of spring term, but I let it slide because I thought there was a finite amount of time I'd have to deal with them. When the realization came that there was no clear end in sight, I felt tricked, like a rug had been yanked out from under me. This is also the stage of grief where I started to feel alone. There had been a lot of camaraderie in denial. We were all hoping for the best together, but anger was lonely. Am I the only one upset by this? How are people moving on? None of this feels right. After that was bargaining. I'd lost so much time at this point. Months have passed by, and I felt like I would only keep losing more. I was what-ifing myself sick. What if everyone I know has already adapted and found ways to thrive right now, and I'm the only one who hasn't? If I can just power through summer the same way I powered through spring, everything would be fine. Bargaining was my stage of false hope. I thought I could avoid the grief by negotiating with myself. It was a difficult stage to get through because it brought me a sense of false productivity. But it wasn't real. I was still just trying to get back to the person I was before the pandemic, still chasing after my old notions of normalcy. That reality isn't present anymore, and chasing after it is like chasing after a dream. I can't negotiate my way out of my problems. I can't ignore them. So I stopped running, and I started really soaking up my surroundings. I saw my new normal for what it was and realized that virtual life wasn't going anywhere. And then my longest stage of grief started: depression. Once I opened my eyes to my current reality, I wasn't happy. I didn't like the person I was becoming during this pandemic. I felt a strong sense of helplessness. I felt lost. Activities felt less meaningful. I had been disconnected for so long at this point. My depression eventually left me indifferent to finishing school, something that was once a cornerstone in my life. You're going to school, there's no way you're not going to school. Suddenly became an idea that was soft and malleable once the actual act of going anywhere was removed from the equation. I felt like I was losing the best parts of myself. Who am I without my friends, without school? How can I have these big dreams when I'm confined to my house, to my screen? I'm a very future-oriented person, but talking about the future and making plans had become taboo in my head. A Pandora's box I didn't touch because the future was now too uncertain for me to try to build a life around. But this next lesson I learned is one that finally brought me to an actual place of acceptance. Even though the future looks uncertain, and I felt like I could no longer control how it was going to go, I realized that the control and the precision that I thought I once had over my future had never really been there from the start, and that the future is always uncertain, no matter what we tell ourselves to the contrary. So I still need to find ways to work towards my success in a future that isn't perfectly mapped out for me. So now we've come to acceptance. The now. The Naya who's sitting here in front of you, talking to you about accepting one's circumstances and making the most of them. Acceptance takes many forms for me, and one of those forms is motivation. But now, even still, my acceptance and motivation of the situation fluctuates. Before COVID, I could always find that motivation again. If a class was interrupted by something unexpected, like an injury or issues with relationships, I would retreat back into my goals and my plans. It was a comfort, an anchor. But now, what used to be a straight line, easy to follow, where it was headed, now feels like a broken cord that I have to tape together to hold its shape. Instead of it being a linear path, it's now this little squiggly line that fluctuates and dips. It's moving upwards, yes, but not in the same way that it was before. And I've chosen to accept that. I'm accepting the fact that I'm not the same person I was when this pandemic started. I've toughened up. We've all had to. In the past few months, we've experienced a health epidemic, acts of police brutality, one of the largest civil rights movements in history, riots, and now massive wildfires that are consuming the West Coast, all while I try to keep up my grades and juggle the rest of my everyday life tasks and retain my sanity. It's an insanely high expectation for any of us to have of ourselves to go through these things and remain unaffected. I've learned that it's okay to feel scared of the future. It's okay to feel overwhelmed and sad and confused. But it's important to remember, in the midst of all of this madness, to live out the kind of life that you can be proud of. My learning and my success hasn't stopped just because I'm not on campus anymore. And that's something I have to remind myself. There's a large gap between action and inaction, a canyon filled with all of the excuses we tell ourselves to soothe our own fears. But we have to close that gap, cross that canyon, and start living life to its full potential. This pandemic has taught me so much about resilience and made me passionate about college student success. I've worked with various departments at Portland State to create a list of 20 resources that can aid students in finding greater success for themselves. Because my goal was to create a list that any college student could utilize, most of the resources aren't specific to PSU. I've had experience with a lot of the programs, so I've included insights into the application process, departments and contacts that can help you get started, and many others. This list isn't comprehensive, but it's a fantastic place to start. It's available on my LinkedIn, and you're more than welcome to connect with me while you're there. I know that we've all been through a lot, and feeling disconnected and unmotivated are perfectly reasonable responses to the reality that we're living in. But it's become clear that this is a marathon and not a sprint, and we have to find our balance again. Humans need connections. We need goals and dreams. I hope that sharing my personal story has helped you to know that you are not alone in struggling. I hope that you will find the strength to start to rebuild a life that suits you and meets your needs, even if it isn't the same one that you had to let go of. Know that I'm wishing you well.